The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cramped briefing room at Camp Pendleton, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 37 battle-hardened Marines. The air was thick with tension, testosterone, and the lingering smell of strong coffee that had been brewing since 0400 hours. These weren't fresh recruits. These were seasoned warriors, men who had seen combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, who had earned their stripes through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to the cause. And then she walked in. Staff. Sergeant Maria Elena Vasquez stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, her uniform crisp and perfectly pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. But it wasn't her diminutive stature that caught everyone's attention. It was her voice. When she spoke, introducing herself as their new communications specialist, her words came out in barely more than a whisper. The room fell silent, but not out of respect. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm, the kind that Marines who had never seen real leadership mistake for weakness. "Good morning, Marines," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Staff Sergeant Vasquez, and I'll be working with you on." A snicker came from the back of the room. Then another. Within seconds, the professional atmosphere had dissolved into barely concealed mockery. Sergeant Mike Thompson, a mountain of a man who stood 6'4" and had earned his reputation in the streets of Fallujah, leaned back in his chair and muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "How's she gonna give orders when we can't even hear her?" The laughter that followed was cruel and immediate. These men had been conditioned to respect strength, to follow leaders who could bellow commands across a battlefield, who could make their voices heard above the chaos of war. Maria's quiet demeanor seemed to violate everything they understood about military leadership. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." But Maria didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or demand respect. Instead, she simply continued with her briefing, explaining the new communication protocols they would be implementing. Her voice remained steady, professional, and impossibly quiet. To the Marines in that room, she might as well have been invisible. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Maria Elena Vasquez had grown up in East Los Angeles, the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. She had learned early that sometimes the quietest person in the room was also the most dangerous. She had earned her way into the Marines not through family connections or easy circumstances, but through sheer determination and an intelligence that had consistently placed her at the top of every training program she'd ever entered. The mocking continued throughout that first week. During morning PT, when she would call out instructions for the communication drills, Marines would cup their ears dramatically, pretending they couldn't hear her. In the mess hall, conversations would stop when she passed by, only to resume in whispered imitations of her soft-spoken manner. The nickname Whisper started making rounds, and not in a respectful way. Captain James Rodriguez, the company commander, watched this dynamic with growing concern. He had specifically requested Maria for this assignment because of her exceptional record. She had graduated top of her class from the Defense Language Institute, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had developed communication strategies that had saved lives in some of the most dangerous operations in recent military history. But he also knew that respect in the corps had to be earned, not assigned. "Maybe she's just not cut out for this," suggested Lieutenant Patterson during a private meeting. "The men need someone they can look up to, someone who commands presence." Captain Rodriguez remained unconvinced. He had seen Maria's file, had read the classified reports of her work in classified operations that these Marines would never even know existed. There was something about her quiet confidence that reminded him of some of the most effective leaders he had ever served under. Leaders who didn't need to shout to be heard, who could command respect through competence rather than volume. The breaking point came during their second week together. The unit was preparing for a major training exercise that would test their communication systems under simulated combat conditions. It was exactly the kind of scenario where Maria's expertise would be most valuable, but the Marines had grown so accustomed to dismissing her that they barely paid attention during the preparatory briefings. "This is going to be a disaster," muttered Corporal Jenkins to his buddy. "How's she gonna coordinate anything when half the unit can't hear her over the radio static?" They were about to find out that they had drastically underestimated the quiet woman who had been trying to prepare them for what was coming. What Maria's fellow Marines didn't realize was that their underestimation of her quiet strength was about to be tested in ways they never could have imagined. The training exercise was set to begin at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. The scenario was designed to simulate a complex urban warfare situation, complete with multiple communication channels, encrypted transmissions, and the kind of chaos that separates competent soldiers from exceptional ones. For the Marines of Bravo Company, it was just another drill. For Maria, it was an opportunity to demonstrate what real leadership looked like. The night before the exercise, Maria had worked until 0200 hours, triple-checking every communication protocol, every backup system, every contingency plan. She had memorized the call signs of every Marine in the unit, studied their individual strengths and weaknesses, and prepared for scenarios that the training manual didn't even consider. While her colleagues slept, she was ensuring that when the morning came, she would be ready for anything. The mockery had evolved over the past week. What had started as simple jokes about her quiet voice had become something more systematic, more cruel. Marines would accidentally turn off their radios when she was speaking, claim they couldn't hear her instructions, or openly question her decisions in front of junior enlisted personnel. The undermining was subtle enough that it didn't constitute formal insubordination, but it was clear enough that everyone understood what was happening. Sergeant Thompson had become the unofficial leader of this resistance. His logic was simple. If you couldn't command respect through your voice, you didn't deserve to lead Marines. He had served 3 tours in combat zones, had seen friends die because of poor communication, and he wasn't about to trust his life to someone who spoke like a librarian. "Look, nothing personal against her," he explained to his squad during the smoke break. "But this is the Marines, not some corporate boardroom. When bullets start flying, you need someone who can make themselves heard. You need someone who can grab you by the collar and drag you out of danger if necessary. You think Whisper over there is gonna do that?" The nods of agreement around the circle confirmed what Thompson already knew. The unit had made up its mind about their new communications specialist. She was smart, maybe even competent, but she wasn't Marine material. Not really. What they didn't realize was that Maria heard everything. Not because she was eavesdropping, but because she made it her business to understand the dynamics of every unit she worked with. She had served with men like Thompson before, good Marines who confused volume with leadership, who mistook aggression for competence. She also knew that arguing with them would be pointless. The only way to earn their respect was to prove them wrong when it mattered most. The morning of the exercise dawned gray and overcast, with a light drizzle that made the training ground slick and treacherous. The Marines assembled in full combat gear, their faces painted with camouflage, their weapons checked and ready. The objective was straightforward: navigate through a mock urban environment, secure 3 strategic positions, and maintain communication. With headquarters throughout the operation, Maria positioned herself at the primary communication hub, surrounded by banks of radios, computers, and monitoring equipment. Her voice, as always, was calm and measured as she conducted the pre-exercise communications check. One by one, she called out to each squad leader, confirming their radio frequencies and establishing the protocols they would follow. "Bravo 1, this is base, radio check over." "Base, this is Bravo 1, I copy you loud and clear," came Thompson's voice. though his tone suggested he was already annoyed by the formality. "Bravo 2, this is Base, radio check, over." "Yeah, Base, we got you," replied Corporal Martinez, dispensing. With proper radio protocol in a way that would have earned him a reprimand from any other communications specialist, Maria noted the breach of protocol, but said nothing. She had learned that sometimes you had to let people make their own mistakes before they were ready to learn from them. The exercise began with a simulated artillery barrage, followed by the complex movement of 3 squads through what was designed to look like a war-torn Middle Eastern city. Buildings had been constructed to provide realistic cover, complete with narrow alleyways, hidden sniper positions, and the kind of urban maze that had claimed so many lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, their communications clear and coordinated. Thompson's squad secured the first objective without incident, while Martinez's team established overwatch positions on the second floor of a mock apartment building. The third squad, led by Sergeant Williams, was making steady progress toward their assigned target. But then the unexpected happened. The exercise controllers, unbeknownst to the Marines, had introduced a complication that wasn't in the original plan. A civilian had been injured in the simulated crossfire, and the rescue operation required immediate medical evacuation while maintaining operational security. It was exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered scenario that tested not just individual competence, but the leadership skills of everyone involved. And that's when Maria's quiet voice became the most important sound in the entire training area. Moment Maria had been preparing for, when her quiet voice would become the most important sound in the entire training area, arrived sooner than anyone expected. The call came through at 0847 hours, crackling with static and urgent desperation. "Base, this is Bravo 3, we have a situation. Civilian casualty, requesting immediate medical evacuation, over." Sergeant Williams' voice cut through the radio. Chatter with the kind of tension that made everyone in the communication hub freeze. This wasn't part of the planned exercise. The injury was real, and the clock was ticking. Maria's response was immediate and decisive. While other Marines might have panicked, might have raised their voices to match the urgency of the situation, she did something that surprised everyone listening. She became even more calm, even more measured in her speech. "Bravo 3, this is Base. I copy your request for medical evacuation. What is the nature of the injury, over?" "Base, we have a simulated civilian with what appears to be a real ankle fracture. Individual is in significant pain and unable to move. We need a medic. An extraction team immediately, over." The situation was complicated by the fact that they were in the middle of a training exercise with limited medical personnel on standby. The injured person was a role player, a local actor hired to make the urban warfare scenario more realistic. But his injury was genuine, and the mock battlefield suddenly became a real emergency requiring real solutions. Thompson's voice cut through the channel. "Base, this is Bravo 1. We can abandon the exercise and extract the civilian immediately. Just need you to coordinate with exercise control." It was a reasonable suggestion, the kind of pragmatic solution that most people would have accepted. But Maria understood something that the others didn't. This was exactly the kind of scenario that Marines face in actual combat. Real emergencies don't wait for convenient timing. Real leadership is tested when multiple priorities compete for attention and resources. Negative Bravo 1. We maintain the exercise while coordinating medical evacuation. Bravo 2, this is Base. I need you to establish overwatch for the extraction route while maintaining your current objective. Bravo 3. I need you to secure the casualty's position and prepare for medical team arrival. Medical team is being dispatched to your location now, over. The radio fell silent for a moment. Then Thompson's voice, tinged with disbelief. "Base, Are you seriously asking us to continue the exercise while someone's hurt? Maria's voice remained steady, but there was something in her tone that made everyone pay attention. Bravo 1, in real combat, casualties don't pause operations. They require us to adapt operations. Medical evacuation is now part of your mission. Acknowledge over. What happened next would become the stuff of Marine Corps legend. Maria began orchestrating the most complex communication operation that any of these Marines had ever witnessed. She was simultaneously coordinating with exercise control to modify the scenario, directing the medical team to the casualties location, maintaining communication with all 3 squads, and ensuring that the training objectives were adapted rather than abandoned. Her voice never rose above its characteristic whisper, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. She wasn't asking for compliance. She was commanding it through sheer professional competence. Bravo 2, I need you to move to position Charlie 7 and provide overwatch for the medical team. Bravo 1, you will continue toward your objective, but establish a secondary route that avoids the casualty area. Bravo 3, you have dual mission. Secure the casualty and maintain your assigned sector. Medical team, you have clear passage through route Delta 2. Bravo 2 will provide overwatch. The Marines began moving with a precision that surprised even them. What had started as a routine training exercise had become something much more complex, and Maria was conducting it like a symphony. Every movement was coordinated, every communication was clear. Every decision was made with the kind of tactical awareness that comes from years of experience. Thompson found himself following orders without question, his squad moving toward their objective while simultaneously providing security for the medical evacuation. Martinez repositioned his team to provide overwatch, his sniper covering the evacuation route while his machine gunner maintained surveillance on the original target area. Williams coordinated with the medical team while keeping his sector secure, and through it all, Maria's quiet voice provided the thread that held everything together. Bravo 1, medical team is approaching your sector. You have green light to continue to objective. Bravo 2, maintain overwatch until medical team clears your area. Bravo 3, prepare to hand off casualty to medical team and resume your mission. The medical team reached the injured actor within 12 minutes of the initial call, a response time that would have been impressive even under normal circumstances. The casualty was stabilized, evacuated, and receiving treatment while the Marines continued their training exercise without missing a beat. But something had changed in those 12 minutes. The Marines who had been mocking Maria's quiet voice just an hour earlier were now hanging on her every word. They had seen her coordinate a complex, multi-layered operation under pressure, and they had witnessed something that all their years of training had told them was impossible. True leadership didn't require volume. It required competence, calm, and the ability to make everyone around you better at their job. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, but the dynamic had shifted completely. When Maria spoke, Marines listened. When she gave instructions, they were followed without question. When she asked for confirmation, the responses came back crisp and professional. The quiet woman they had nicknamed Whisper had just demonstrated what real leadership looked like. But the most dramatic moment was still to come. The dramatic moment that had been building throughout. The morning's exercise was about to unfold in the most unexpected way. The debriefing session was scheduled for 1400 hours in the same cramped room where Maria had first faced the mockery of her new unit, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The Marines who filed in weren't the same cocky, dismissive soldiers who had laughed at her quiet voice 2 weeks earlier. They moved with a different kind of respect, a grudging acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary during the morning's exercise. Captain Rodriguez stood at the front of the room, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the morning's events. The successful completion of the exercise, despite the unexpected medical emergency, had exceeded everyone's expectations. But more importantly, He had watched his Marines transform from a group of individuals into a cohesive unit under Maria's guidance. Today's exercise was evaluated by observers from division headquarters, he began, his voice carrying across the room. The complexity of the scenario, especially with the addition of the medical emergency, tested every aspect of our operational capabilities. I want to commend all of you for your professionalism under pressure. He paused, looking directly at Thompson, who sat straighter in his chair. Sergeant Thompson, your squad's ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining your primary objective was exemplary. Your leadership in the field demonstrated the kind of flexibility that wins battles. Thompson nodded, but his attention kept drifting to Maria, who sat quietly in the corner, taking notes on a small pad of paper. He was beginning to understand. But the morning's success had less to do with his squad's actions, and more to do with the quiet woman who had orchestrated every movement from the communication hub. Corporal Martinez, the captain continued, your overwatch positions were perfectly coordinated with both the medical evacuation and the ongoing tactical situation. Your team's ability to maintain surveillance while adapting to new requirements was outstanding. Martinez accepted the praise, but he too was thinking about the voice that had guided every decision, the soft-spoken instructions that had somehow made everything seem possible. He had served under communications specialists before, but none who could make split-second decisions feel like carefully planned maneuvers. Sergeant Williams, your handling of the casualty situation while maintaining operational security was textbook. You managed to balance humanitarian concerns with tactical requirements in a way that would make any Marine proud. Williams shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew that without Maria's calm guidance, the situation could have quickly spiraled into chaos. Her ability to coordinate multiple priorities simultaneously had been unlike anything he had experienced in his 8 years of service. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Captain Rodriguez's expression grew more serious. But I want to address something that has been brought to my attention. There have been reports of unprofessional behavior towards Staff Sergeant Vasquez. Comments about her leadership style, her communication methods, and her suitability for this position. The room fell silent. Every Marine present knew exactly what the captain was referring to, and most of them felt a growing sense of shame about their earlier behavior. I want to share something with you about Staff Sergeant Vasquez that might help you understand why. She was specifically requested for this assignment, Rodriguez continued. Information that, until now, has remained classified. He pulled out a folder marked with security classifications that made several Marines sit up straighter. This wasn't routine personnel information. This was operational history that most of them would never be authorized to see. 3 years ago, Staff Sergeant Vasquez was embedded with a special operations unit in Afghanistan. Their mission was to establish communication with local tribal leaders in an area that had been controlled by Taliban forces for over 2 years. The situation was delicate. One wrong word, one cultural misunderstanding, and the entire operation could have resulted in casualties. The captain's voice grew more intense. The Special Operations Team consisted of 12 of the most elite soldiers in the military. Men who had completed missions that most Marines never even hear about. And they were all looking to Staff Sergeant Vasquez for guidance on how to communicate with the local population. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each Marine. The initial meeting was scheduled to take place in a compound that intelligence suggested might be compromised. As the team prepared to enter, Staff Sergeant Vasquez identified communication patterns that indicated the location was under surveillance by hostile forces. Thompson leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. This was the kind of operational detail that separated routine assignments from life-or-death missions. Using her knowledge of local dialects and cultural customs, Staff Sergeant Vasquez was able to establish alternative communication channels with the tribal leaders. She coordinated a change of venue that avoided what we later confirmed was a planned ambush. Her quiet, respectful approach to communication not only saved the mission, but saved the lives of everyone involved. The room was completely silent now. The Marines were beginning to understand that they had been judging Maria by the wrong standards entirely. The tribal leaders later told our intelligence officers that they had been prepared to reject any cooperation with American forces. They had been approached by numerous military units before, all of whom had treated them with disrespect or condescension. But Staff Sergeant Vasquez had spoken to them with the kind of quiet dignity that they recognized as true strength. Rodriguez closed the folder. The information she gathered during that mission led to the successful elimination of a terrorist cell that had been responsible for attacks on 3 different coalition bases. The operation was so successful that it became the template for similar missions throughout the region. He looked directly at Maria, who had remained silent throughout the briefing. Staff Sergeant Vasquez doesn't need to raise her voice to command. Respect. She has earned it through competence, courage, and the kind of quiet professionalism that makes the Marines the most effective fighting force in the world. The captain's final words hung in the air like a challenge. Anyone who thinks that leadership requires volume hasn't been paying attention to what leadership actually looks like. The revelations about Maria's classified service record had shattered the Marines' preconceptions, but what they were about to experience would prove that her quiet leadership was just getting started. The week following the debriefing was unlike anything the Marines of Bravo Company had experienced. The revelation of Maria's classified service record had shattered their preconceptions, but it had also created a new dynamic that nobody quite knew how to navigate. The woman they had mocked as Whisper was now revealed to be one of the most accomplished communication specialists in the entire Marine Corps. Thompson found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to reassess everything he thought he knew about leadership. During morning PT, he caught himself paying closer attention to Maria's instructions, noticing details he had previously ignored. Her quiet voice wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a tool she used with surgical precision. Every word was chosen carefully, every instruction delivered with the kind of confidence that came from years of experience in situations where mistakes had life or death consequences. The other Marines were experiencing similar revelations. Martinez began to notice how Maria's quiet demeanor actually commanded more attention than shouting ever could. When she spoke, people leaned in to listen. When she gave instructions, the room fell silent not out of mockery, but out of respect for the precision of her communication. Williams, who had been the most vocal about his skepticism, found himself seeking out Maria's advice on communication protocols. He had seen her coordinate the medical emergency with a level of skill that he was only beginning to appreciate. Her ability to maintain calm under pressure wasn't just impressive. It was exactly what Marines needed in combat situations, but the transformation wasn't complete. Years of conditioning had taught these Marines to associate leadership with physical presence, with the ability to dominate a room through force of personality. Maria's quiet competence challenged every assumption they had made about what effective leadership looked like. The real test came during their next major exercise, a week-long field training that would simulate extended combat operations. Unlike the previous urban warfare scenario, this exercise would test their ability to maintain communication over long distances, in harsh weather conditions and under the kind of sustained pressure that separated good units from exceptional ones. The scenario was brutal, a simulated invasion requiring the Marines to establish and maintain communication lines across 50 miles of rugged terrain. They would be operating in radio silence for extended periods, using only hand signals and predetermined codes to coordinate their movements. It was exactly the kind of exercise where Maria's expertise would be most valuable. The night before the exercise began, Maria called a meeting with the squad leaders. Unlike her previous briefings, this one was different. She stood at the front of the room with a quiet confidence that commanded immediate attention. Tomorrow, we're going to be tested in ways that will challenge everything we've learned about communication under pressure, she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. I want each of you to understand that this exercise isn't just about following orders. It's about becoming the kind of Marines who can adapt to any situation. Thompson nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. He had seen what Maria could do under pressure, and he was beginning to understand that her quiet approach was actually more effective than the aggressive leadership style he had always admired. The key to success in this exercise is trust, Maria continued. You have to trust that when I give you instructions, they're based on information that you might not have access to. You have to trust that when I ask you to change your approach, it's because I can see the bigger picture. She paused, making eye contact with each squad leader. But more importantly, I have to trust that you're going to execute those instructions with the kind of professionalism that makes the Marines the most effective fighting force in the world. The briefing continued for another hour, with Maria outlining contingency plans for every possible scenario. Her preparation was meticulous, her attention to detail was extraordinary, and her ability to anticipate problems before they occurred was unlike anything the Marines had experienced. As the meeting concluded, Thompson approached Maria with a question that had been weighing on his mind. Staff Sergeant, I need to ask you something. During that Afghanistan mission that the captain mentioned, how did you know the original meeting location was compromised? Maria's response was characteristic of her approach to everything, quiet, thoughtful, and precise. The local dialect being used in the radio chatter didn't match the regional variations I had been studying. It was subtle, but it suggested that the people monitoring the communications weren't actually from that area. Combined with the timing of the transmissions and the frequency patterns, it painted a picture of organized surveillance. Thompson stared at her, finally understanding the depth of expertise he had been dismissing. Most people would have missed details like that. Most people, Maria replied with a slight smile, haven't spent 3 years studying the linguistic patterns of Afghan tribal communications. This is what I do, Sergeant. This is what I've always done. The next morning would prove just how exceptional she really was. The next morning would prove just how exceptional Maria really was. But none of the Marines could have predicted the conditions they would face. The field training exercise began at 0400 hours under conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced Marines. A late-season storm had moved through the training area overnight, leaving the terrain muddy, treacherous, and shrouded in fog that reduced visibility to less than 50 meters. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and a steady drizzle made every surface slippery and unpredictable. Maria had been awake since 0200 hours, making final adjustments to the communication plan and monitoring weather reports that suggested conditions would only get worse throughout the day. She had repositioned relay stations to account for the terrain changes caused by the storm, recalibrated equipment to deal with the electromagnetic interference caused by the weather, and prepared backup systems for scenarios that most communications specialists would never even consider. The Marines assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces painted with camouflage, their gear secured against the elements. The mission was more complex than anything they had attempted before. 3 squads would advance along separate routes toward a common objective, maintaining radio silence while coordinating their movements through a series of predetermined signals and backup communication methods. Captain Rodriguez observed the preparation with the kind of attention that suggested this exercise carried more weight than a routine training mission. Word had come down from division headquarters that the performance of Bravo Company during this exercise would determine their readiness for deployment to a classified operational area. The stakes were higher than anyone had initially realized. "Remember," Maria addressed the assembled Marines, her voice carrying clearly despite the wind and rain. "Communication discipline is critical to mission success. Maintain radio silence unless you encounter an emergency situation. Use hand signals and predetermined codes for routine coordination. Trust your training, trust your equipment, and trust each other." Thompson nodded, his squad ready to move out along the northern route. Martinez's team would take the central approach, while Williams' squad would advance from the south. The objective was a hilltop position that would require coordinated assault from 3 directions, timed to the minute to ensure maximum effectiveness. As the Marines began their movement, Maria settled into the command post that had been established in a reinforced bunker overlooking the training area. She was surrounded by communication equipment that would allow her to monitor the exercise without interfering with the Marines' radio silence. Her role was to observe, to provide emergency support if required, and to coordinate with exercise control to ensure safety throughout the operation. The first indication that something was wrong came at 0630 hours. Martinez's squad had reached their first checkpoint ahead of schedule, but Williams' team was encountering terrain difficulties that hadn't been anticipated. The storm had washed out a bridge that was critical to their planned route, forcing them to find an alternative approach that would delay their arrival at them. Objective. Maria monitored the situation through encrypted communication channels that allowed her to track each squad's progress without breaking their radio silence. She could see the tactical problem developing. If Williams' squad was delayed, the coordinated assault would fail. The timing of the operation depended on all 3 squads reaching their positions simultaneously. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a simple problem to solve. A quick radio call to redirect Williams' squad to an alternative route would have kept the operation on schedule. But the radio silence protocol meant that Maria couldn't communicate directly with the Marines in the field. She had to find a way to coordinate the mission without breaking the communication discipline that was central to the exercise. This was where Maria's years of experience in complex operations became invaluable. She had faced similar situations in Afghanistan, where radio silence was maintained to avoid detection by hostile forces. She had learned to coordinate operations through subtle signals, through changes in routine patterns, and through the kind of tactical awareness that allowed experienced Marines to adapt to changing circumstances without explicit instructions. Maria began implementing a solution that demonstrated the depth of her tactical knowledge. She coordinated with exercise control to introduce environmental cues that would alert the Marines to changing conditions. A helicopter overflight along Williams' original route would signal the terrain difficulties. A smoke signal visible from Thompson's position would indicate the need for modified timing. A series of flares fired from the command post would provide coordinates for an alternative assault route. The Marines in the field began responding to these signals with the kind of professional adaptation that Maria had been hoping to see. Williams' squad identified the alternative route and began moving toward a position that would allow them to participate in the coordinated assault. Thompson's team adjusted their timing to account for the delay. Martinez's squad prepared to provide covering fire for the modified approach. But the real test came when the weather deteriorated even further. The drizzle became a downpour. The wind picked up to gale force, and visibility dropped to less than 20 meters. The electronic equipment that the Marines depended on for navigation and coordination began experiencing interference that made precision timing almost impossible. Maria watched the situation develop with growing concern. The Marines were operating under conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced special operations units. The combination of terrain difficulties, weather conditions, And communication restrictions created exactly the kind of scenario where missions failed and people got hurt. And then, at 0847 hours, everything changed. Williams' squad encountered an unexpected obstacle that threatened to compromise the entire operation. They had reached their assault position, but discovered that the approach route was blocked by terrain that hadn't appeared on any of their maps. The coordinated assault was scheduled to begin in 13 minutes, but Williams' team wasn't going to be in position. The radio silence protocol prevented Williams from communicating the problem to the other squads. The predetermined signals weren't designed to handle this level of complexity. The mission was about to fail, and there was no way to coordinate an alternative approach without breaking the communication discipline that was central to the exercise. That's when Maria made a decision that would define her entire career. At 847 hours, with the mission hanging in the balance and 37 Marines depending on her leadership, Maria Vasquez made a decision that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. She stood up in the command post, her quiet voice cutting through the static of the radio communications with absolute clarity. All stations, this is base. Break radio silence. Acknowledge over. The words carried across the training area with the weight of absolute authority. Every Marine in the field froze, their training telling them that breaking radio silence was forbidden, but their instincts recognizing the voice of someone who had earned the right to make that call. Thompson's voice came through first. Base, this is Bravo 1. Breaking radio silence, over. Base, this is Bravo 2. Radio silence broken, over. Followed Martinez, his tone reflecting the confusion that every Marine was feeling. Williams' squad was the last to respond. Base, this is Bravo 3. We have a problem at our position. Over. Maria's response was immediate and decisive. Bravo 3, I copy your situation. All stations, maintain your positions while I coordinate alternative assault plan. Bravo 1, what is your current status? Over. Base, we are in position and ready to execute on your command. Over. Bravo 2, status report. Over. Base, we have clear sight lines to the objective and are prepared for covering fire. Over. Bravo 3, describe the obstacle at your position. Over. Williams' voice carried the frustration of a Marine who had been trying to solve an impossible problem. Base, the terrain is impassable. We have a 40-foot cliff face that wasn't on any of our maps. We cannot reach our assigned position for the coordinated assault. Over. What happened next demonstrated why Maria had been specifically requested for this assignment. Instead of panicking, instead of calling off the mission, instead of defaulting to the kind of rigid thinking that turned obstacles into failures, she began orchestrating a solution that would require every Marine to perform at the highest level of their capabilities. All stations, this is base. We are implementing alternative plan Charlie. Bravo 1, you will initiate the assault from your current position at 0900 hours. Bravo 2, you will provide covering fire and overwatch. Bravo 3, you will establish a blocking position to prevent enemy withdrawal. This is a dynamic assault with modified objectives. The radio crackled with responses that reflected the Marines' growing confidence in their communication specialist. Base, this is Bravo 1. We understand alternative plan Charlie and are ready to execute. Over. Base, this is Bravo 2. We have adjusted our position for optimal covering fire. Over. Base, this is Bravo 3. Moving to establish blocking position. Over. But Maria wasn't finished. She had identified something that the Marines in the field couldn't see, an opportunity that would turn their tactical disadvantage into a strategic advantage. The terrain that had blocked Williams' squad from reaching their original position had also created a natural choke point that could be used to channel enemy movement. Bravo 3, I need you to establish overwatch position at grid reference 347 to 892. From that position, You will have clear sightlines to the objective's primary escape route. Any enemy forces attempting to withdraw will be forced to move through your field of fire. William's voice came back with new enthusiasm. Base, I understand. We are moving to Overwatch position now. Over. Maria continued coordinating the modified assault with the kind of tactical awareness that transformed the potential failure into a textbook example of adaptive leadership. She was simultaneously tracking the movement of all three squads, monitoring weather conditions that could affect visibility and communication, and preparing contingency plans for scenarios that might develop during the assault. Bravo 1, begin. Your approach to the objective. Maintain communication intervals of 3 minutes. Bravo 2, I need continuous updates on target movement. Bravo 3, confirm when you have established Overwatch position. The assault began with the kind of precision that surprised even the Marines executing it. Thompson's squad moved forward under the covering fire provided by Martinez's team, while Williams' squad established a blocking position that prevented any simulated enemy forces from escaping the objective area. The coordination was flawless. The timing was perfect, and the execution demonstrated the kind of tactical flexibility that distinguished exceptional units from merely competent ones. But the most remarkable aspect of the operation was Maria's voice throughout the entire engagement. Never once did she raise her voice above the quiet, measured tone that had once been mocked by these same Marines. Every instruction was delivered with calm authority, every decision was made with confidence, and every communication was precise and professional. Base, this is Bravo 1. We have secured the objective. Over. Base, this is Bravo 2. No enemy movement detected. Over. Base, this is Bravo 3. Blocking position maintained. No enemy withdrawal attempts. Over. Maria's response reflected the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. All stations. This is Base. Mission accomplished. Excellent work, Marines. Return to Rally Point Alpha for debriefing. Over. The exercise had lasted less than 2 hours, but it had demonstrated something that would change the dynamic of Bravo Company forever. The quiet woman who had been dismissed as unsuitable for Marine leadership had just coordinated one of the most successful training exercises in the unit's history. As the Marines began their movement back to the rally point, Thompson found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since Maria's arrival. The woman they had mocked for her quiet voice had just proven that true leadership didn't require volume, it required competence, confidence, and the ability to make everyone around you better at their job. The career-defining decision Maria had just made would have consequences that none of them could have anticipated. The debriefing session that followed the exercise was unlike anything the Marines of Bravo Company had experienced. Captain Rodriguez stood before the assembled unit with the kind of satisfaction that came from watching his Marines exceed every expectation. The successful completion of the modified assault, despite the challenging weather conditions and unexpected terrain obstacles, had demonstrated a level of tactical flexibility that impressed even the seasoned observers from division headquarters. Marines, he began, his voice carrying the pride of a commander who had just watched his unit prove themselves under pressure. What you accomplish today will be used as a case study for adaptive leadership in complex operational environments. The ability to modify your tactical approach while maintaining operational effectiveness is exactly what separates good Marines from exceptional ones. The Marines sat straighter in their chairs, but their attention kept drifting to Maria, who sat quietly in the corner, reviewing her notes from the exercise. They were beginning to understand that their success had been orchestrated by someone whose expertise far exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The decision to break radio silence was tactically sound and strategically brilliant. Rodriguez continued. Staff Sergeant Vasquez recognized that rigid adherence to protocol would have resulted in mission failure. Her ability to adapt the communication plan to changing circumstances while maintaining Operational security demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership that wins battles. Thompson raised his hand, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. "Sir, how did Staff Sergeant Vasquez know that alternative Plan Charlie would work? We hadn't trained for that scenario." Rodriguez looked at Maria, who nodded slightly. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, would you explain your tactical reasoning to the unit?" Maria stood, her quiet voice carrying easily across the room. "The terrain obstacle that prevented Bravo 3 from reaching their original position created a natural choke point that could be exploited tactically. By repositioning them to establish overwatch of the primary escape route, we turned their disadvantage into a strategic advantage. The enemy forces had no viable withdrawal options, which made the assault more effective than the original plan would have been." The explanation was delivered with the kind of matter-of-fact professionalism that made complex tactical concepts seem obvious. But the Marines listening understood that they were hearing from someone whose tactical awareness operated on a completely different level than their own. Martinez asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Staff Sergeant, how did you see all of that from the command post? We were the ones on the ground, but you understood the terrain better than we did." Maria's response revealed the depth of preparation that had gone into the exercise. "I spent 3 hours before the exercise studying topographical maps, weather reports, and terrain analysis. I identified 17 potential obstacles that could affect your movement, and I prepared contingency plans for each scenario. The cliff face that blocked Bravo 3's movement was identified as a possibility during my preliminary analysis." The room fell silent as the Marines absorbed this information. While they had been sleeping, Maria had been preparing for every possible scenario. While they had been joking about her quiet voice, she had been developing solutions to problems they didn't even know existed. Williams spoke up, his voice carrying a new respect. "Staff Sergeant, you had contingency plans for 17 different scenarios?" 32, actually, Maria replied with a slight smile. "The 17 I mentioned were just the terrain obstacles. I also prepared for equipment failures, weather complications, communication breakdowns, and medical emergencies. That's what communications specialists do. We prepare for everything so that Marines can focus on executing their missions." Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "This is exactly why Staff Sergeant Vasquez was specifically requested for this assignment. Her level of preparation, her tactical awareness, and her ability to coordinate complex operations under pressure are exactly what this unit needed." The transformation in the Marines' attitudes was remarkable. Thompson, who had been the most vocal critic of Maria's leadership style, found himself asking detailed questions about communication protocols. Martinez wanted to understand how she had coordinated the covering fire with such precision. Williams was curious about the tactical principles that had guided her decision-making. But the most significant change was in how they listened to her responses. When Maria spoke, every Marine in the room leaned forward to catch her words. Her quiet voice wasn't a limitation. It was a tool that commanded attention through competence rather than volume. "I want to address something that happened during the early stages of Staff Sergeant Vasquez's assignment to this unit," Rodriguez said, his tone becoming more serious. "There were comments about her communication style, questions about her suitability for Marine leadership, and a general attitude that suggested some of you weren't ready to accept her authority." The room grew uncomfortable as Marines reflected on their earlier behavior. The contrast between their initial mockery and their current respect was stark and undeniable. "I want each of you to understand that you just witnessed one of the most accomplished communication specialists in the Marine Corps demonstrate exactly what effective leadership looks like. The quiet professionalism that some of you mistook for weakness is actually the hallmark of someone who has earned the right to lead through competence, preparation, and results." Rodriguez paused, looking directly at Thompson. "Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most prepared, the most competent, and the most committed to the success of your Marines. Today, Staff Sergeant Vasquez demonstrated all of those qualities. The captain's words hung in the air as the Marines contemplated the lesson they had just learned. But the most powerful moment was still to come, the lesson about true leadership. That the Marines had learned was about to be tested in ways they never could have imagined. 3 days after the successful field exercise, an unexpected development would test everything the Marines had learned about leadership, respect, and the true meaning of military bearing. The morning began routinely enough: 0530 reveille, morning PT, chow, and the usual administrative tasks that filled the gaps between training exercises. But at 0900 hours, Captain Rodriguez received a phone call that would change the trajectory of every Marine in Bravo Company. The call came from Colonel Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer of the 2nd Marine Division, a woman whose reputation for excellence was legendary throughout the corps. Colonel Hayes had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had commanded battalions in some of the most challenging operational environments, and had earned the respect of every Marine who had ever served under her command. Captain Rodriguez. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Vasquez immediately. I'm flying in this afternoon, and I want to meet with her and her unit." Rodriguez felt a surge of pride mixed with curiosity. Division commanders didn't make personal visits to individual staff sergeants unless something extraordinary had happened. "Yes, ma'am. May I ask what this is regarding?" "The after-action report from your recent field exercise has been reviewed at the highest levels. Staff Sergeant Vasquez's performance has attracted attention from some very senior people. I'll explain more when I arrive." The news that a division commander was coming to meet with Maria spread through the unit like wildfire. Marines who had been mocking her quiet voice just weeks earlier were now speculating about what kind of recognition she might receive. The transformation in their attitudes was complete. Maria had evolved from whisper to someone they recognized as genuinely exceptional. Colonel Hayes arrived at 1400 hours in a convoy that included several other senior officers whose presence suggested this was more than a routine visit. She was a tall, imposing woman whose bearing commanded immediate respect. Every Marine in the unit snapped to attention as she entered the building, but her attention was focused entirely on Maria. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the room understand they were witnessing something significant. "I've reviewed the after-action report from your recent exercise. The tactical flexibility you demonstrated, the leadership you provided under pressure, and the results you achieved have impressed some very senior people." Maria stood at attention, her quiet voice steady as she responded, "Thank you, ma'am. I was simply doing my job." Colonel Hayes smiled at the response. "Staff Sergeant, what you did was far beyond simply doing your job. You demonstrated the kind of adaptive leadership that we need at the highest levels of the corps, which is why I'm here with an offer." She paused, looking around the room at the Marines who were hanging on her every word. "The Marine Corps is establishing a new advanced communications training program. We need an instructor who can teach other Marines how to coordinate complex operations under pressure. We need someone who can demonstrate that leadership isn't about volume, it's about competence." The offer was extraordinary. Assignment 2. A training command was typically reserved for Marines who had demonstrated exceptional leadership over many years. For Maria to be offered such a position at her current rank was almost unprecedented. The position comes with immediate promotion to Gunnery Sergeant and assignment to Marine Corps Base Quantico. You would be developing curriculum that would be used throughout the Corps, training the next generation of communication specialists. Maria's response was characteristic of her approach to everything: thoughtful, professional, and focused on the mission rather than personal advancement. Ma'am, I'm honored by the offer, but I have a commitment to the Marines of Bravo Company. They've invested time in learning my methods, and I believe I can continue to contribute to their success. Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of response I expected from you, Staff Sergeant, which is why I'm prepared to make this offer even more attractive. She turned to address the entire unit. Marines, I want you to understand that you've been serving with someone whose capabilities extend far beyond what you've seen in training exercises. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has been offered positions with special operations units, intelligence organizations, and advanced training commands. She has consistently chosen to remain with line units because she believes in developing the capabilities of regular Marines. The Colonel's words carried a weight that made every Marine in the room understand they had been privileged to serve with someone truly exceptional. Thompson found himself thinking about all the times he had questioned Maria's leadership, all the comments he had made about her quiet voice, all the opportunities he had missed to learn from someone whose expertise far exceeded his own. But today, Colonel Hayes continued, I'm going to make an offer that I believe will serve both Staff Sergeant Vasquez's career and the needs of the Corps. She looked directly at Maria. I want you to accept the position at Quantico, but I want you to take selected members of your current unit with you. Marines who have demonstrated the ability to adapt to your leadership style, who have shown that they can execute complex operations under your guidance. The offer was unprecedented. Training commands typically didn't request specific Marines from line units. But Colonel Hayes had recognized something in the after-action reports that suggested Bravo Company had developed capabilities that could be replicated throughout the Corps. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I want you to select 5 Marines from your current unit to join you at Quantico. Marines who can serve as assistant instructors, who can help demonstrate the kind of teamwork and communication that made your recent exercise so successful. Maria's response would demonstrate once again why she had earned the respect of everyone who had ever served with her. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened that would become the defining moment of her entire career. Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying across the room with absolute clarity. Ma'am, if I may speak. The moment that would define Maria's legacy and change how these Marines viewed leadership forever was about to unfold. Colonel Hayes turned toward Thompson, her expression indicating that she was accustomed to Marines who understood proper protocol. Go ahead, Sergeant. Thompson came to attention, his voice carrying the kind of conviction that comes from hard-earned wisdom. Ma'am, I need to say something about Staff Sergeant Vasquez that I should have said weeks ago. He paused, looking around the room at his fellow Marines, many of whom were nodding in understanding. They all knew what he was about to say, and they all knew it needed to be said. When Staff Sergeant Vasquez first arrived at this unit, we didn't give her the respect she deserved. We judged her by her voice, by her size, by standards that had nothing to do with her capabilities as a Marine. We were wrong, and we were unprofessional. Colonel Hayes listened with the kind of attention that suggested she had heard similar stories before. The challenge of earning respect in a male-dominated environment was something she understood personally. But more than that, Thompson continued, his voice growing stronger, we failed to recognize that we were serving with someone whose leadership abilities exceeded anything we had experienced. Staff Sergeant Vasquez didn't just coordinate successful missions, she made all of us better Marines. Martinez stepped forward to join Thompson. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Vasquez taught us that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most prepared, the most competent, and the most committed to the success of your Marines. Williams moved to stand beside his fellow squad leaders. She demonstrated that true strength comes from knowledge, preparation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Everything we thought we knew about leadership was wrong. One by one, every Marine in the room began moving to stand with their squad leaders. It wasn't organized or planned, it was the spontaneous response of Marines, who had learned to recognize excellence when they saw it. Colonel Hayes watched this development with growing interest. In her years of service, she had seen many demonstrations of military respect, but there was something different about what was happening in this room. These Marines weren't just following protocol, they were expressing genuine admiration for someone who had earned their respect through competence and character. Thompson's voice carried across the room as he continued, "Ma'am, if Staff Sergeant Vasquez is willing to accept the position at Quantico, every Marine in this room would be honored to serve with her in any capacity. We've learned more about leadership in the past month than we learned in years of previous service." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Maria's response. She stood quietly for a moment, looking around at the Marines who had transformed from skeptics to believers, from mockers to supporters. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the same quiet authority that had guided them through successful missions and challenging exercises. "Colonel Hayes," she said, her words measured and professional, "I accept the position at Quantico, but I want to recommend that the entire unit be considered for advanced training opportunities. These Marines have demonstrated the kind of adaptability and professionalism that the Corps needs at every level." Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly. "Staff Sergeant, your recommendation will be given serious consideration. But right now, I need you to select the 5 Marines who will accompany you to Quantico." Maria's response demonstrated once again why she had earned the respect of everyone who served with her. "Ma'am, I cannot select only 5 Marines from this unit. They have all demonstrated exceptional capabilities, and they have all earned the opportunity to advance their careers." The colonel's expression showed that she had been hoping for exactly this response. "Staff Sergeant, what if I told you that we could expand the program to accommodate more Marines? What if we could bring the entire unit to Quantico for advanced training?" The offer was extraordinary, but Maria's response was characteristic of her approach to everything. "Ma'am, these Marines have earned that opportunity through their performance, their professionalism, and their commitment to excellence. I would be honored to continue serving with them." Colonel Hayes turned to address the entire unit. "Marines, what you've witnessed today is exactly what leadership looks like. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has been offered a prestigious assignment that would advance her career significantly. But her first concern is for the Marines she serves with." She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected pride, respect, and genuine admiration. This is why the Marine Corps exists, not for individual advancement, but for the development of Marines who put the mission and their fellow Marines before their own interests. The colonel's next words would become part of Marine Corps' legend. "I want every Marine in this room to understand that you have been serving with someone whose leadership abilities represent the highest standards of the Corps' staff. Sergeant Vasquez has demonstrated that effective leadership doesn't require volume, it requires competence, preparation, and unwavering commitment to the success of your Marines." She looked directly at Maria. "Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that your leadership style, your tactical abilities, and your commitment to developing other Marines will be studied and emulated throughout the Corps. You have redefined what effective leadership looks like. Then, in a moment that would be remembered by every Marine present for the rest of their careers, Colonel Hayes did something that violated every protocol in the Marine Corps manual. She, a division commander, came to attention and rendered a salute. To a staff sergeant, the gesture was unprecedented, but its meaning was clear to everyone in the room. She wasn't saluting Maria's rank, she was saluting the kind of leadership that represented the highest ideals of the Marine Corps. Thompson's voice cut through the silence. "Company, Attention." Every Marine in the room snapped to attention, with precision that would have made drill instructors proud. And then, in perfect unison, 37 Marines rendered the most respectful salute of their military careers. The quiet woman they had once mocked for her soft voice had just received the highest honor that Marines can bestow, the genuine respect of those who had served with her. and learned from her example. Maria returned the salute with the same quiet dignity that had characterized everything she had done since arriving at Bravo Company. Her voice, still soft but carrying absolute authority, delivered the response that would define her legacy. "The honor has been mine, Marines. The honor has been mine." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.